Greetings. Welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Hand is a folk rock band who released a rare gem of an album, Everybody's Own. The album was recorded in Switzerland in 1972. The majority of the tracks have a softer melodic flavor, which is right up my alley. And the music is timeless, sounding as fresh today as it did back in '72. Songwriting duties were shared by Tony Angier and my guest today, Marc Osborne. The harmonica player was and is Nick Zoullas, who is still playing and recording with Marc. Alas, a second album would not come until many years later. The members went in different directions, some to college and others pursuing other interests. Over the years, they stayed in touch. In 2011, the Golden Pavilion label contacted Marc, wishing to re-release a 40th anniversary album for 2012. Then came a reunion the same year and a new album in 2014. The rest is recent history, as Hand have released 6 more albums to date. Well, welcome, Marc.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thank you for joining me today.
You bet.
So you were born in Uruguay.
I was.
Any memories there?
Well, there's a song on one of the albums called I Can't Remember My Country.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the title. That's the title of actually the longest song that I've ever recorded. So it's kind of amusing that a song that purports to indicate that I don't remember my country ends up being the longest song about my country. So I have all kinds of sensory memories, but I left when I was young. I left when I was about 5 going on 6 years old. And I actually have not been back to Uruguay. I was born in Montevideo.
Okay.
My mother was Uruguayan.
Okay.
And so the fact of being born there is significant to this day to me, because I've had friends from there. I have, apparently I have an accent in Spanish that betrays the fact that I was from there, even though I haven't been back.
Right?
So it's very interesting how it kind of marked me and it's remained with me. So it's a real touchstone in my life, even though I haven't spent much time there since I was 6.
Okay. Well, you moved around quite a bit as a child. Was your dad in the military?
Well, that's the common question that I get when people see my background. And no, he was not in the military. He was an art dealer.
Okay.
And he had the ability to travel a good deal for his business, and he could work from various places. And that will explain to a great degree why we moved around so much as a family. By the time I was 6 going on 7, I was living in Florence in Italy, where I lived for 2 years as a little kid, going to school and very quickly picking up Italian, because at that age, you learn everything. You're like blotting paper, you absorb everything that's there. So I learned Italian and lived in Florence during those 2 years. And then at age 7 going on 8, we moved after a couple of other short stints in France and in England. We moved to Switzerland, to Lausanne, Switzerland, which is on Lake Léman, which is also known as Lake Geneva. So there's Geneva on one side of the lake and Lausanne on the other. And we moved to Lausanne for what was supposed to be a year, and it turned into 14 years.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
So I was incredibly fortunate, and I had to pick up French in order to survive. This is French-speaking Switzerland. And so I also learned French along the way. So as a result, by the time I was 8 going on 9, I was fluent in 4 languages as a child, which is a very important marker. If you learn languages when you're older, it's nearly impossible to learn them perfectly. But if you learn them before the age of 10 or 11, you really basically grow up with those languages as part of you. And so I'm fluent in 4 languages, and I'm not bragging about it. It's just the good fortune of being where I was at the time that I was there. And it stayed with me to this day.
Right. So there was never any issue of getting them confused. I've always wondered that about people that learn more than one.
It's funny. It's funny. If you learn them when you're very young, things that seem confusing when you learn them as an older person,
right, or not,
don't confuse you at all when you're 7 or when you're 8. You simply accept the information and you deal with it. And you absorb it very quickly. The brain is just wide open to everything. And so, for example, I really very rarely have any problem at all distinguishing Spanish from Italian, because to me, these are very different sounding languages. But I know that for people who don't speak the other language and they're adults, to them, these languages resemble each other. So I think I was just extremely lucky to have that exposure early on in life. And it's been a major influence on my life and also on my music, my songwriting.
Okay, I imagine so. Were either one of your parents musically inclined at all?
My father was a magnificent singer, but never did a thing with it. He really had one of those beautiful crooning voices that you might associate with Bing Crosby or someone of that sort, of that generation. And he used to sing around the house. Both my parents were like you in the sense that they were music lovers. My father was an opera buff. I never became an opera buff, which I think was distressful to him. That the one genre of music that he loved the most was the one that I was least receptive to. That's changed a little bit. I'm much more open to it the past few years. But they were both musical in the sense of appreciating and encouraging. And when they saw that I had an inclination in that direction, they were very quick to get me to take piano lessons and then eventually to get a guitar, which really was the instrument that opened up my musical life.
Right. What were your earliest recollections of music being played in the house? Either via radio, or was there a stereo or anything like that?
Yeah. So I remember that, well, we did have music throughout the house. And so it was not uncommon for me to come back from school and hear music being played. Most of the time it was classical music.
Okay.
And sometimes it would be opera. So it might be also sometimes Sinatra, Tony Bennett, that genre of singing and sort of the American songbook.
Yeah.
So even though I was growing up very far from the United States, I was never really that far from some of these earlier great singers and interpreters of music. So all of that sort of seeped in, and it helped to make a sort of cushion of influence. And then the first musician that I remember just being blown away by at age 11 was Trini Lopez.
Is that right?
And I thought he was the coolest guy ever. And I remember, and this is when Trini Lopez was very successful. I mean, he was a global. He's from Dallas.
Yes. Yes.
Well, funnily enough, he lived until he passed away a couple of years ago. He lived here in Palm Springs, and he has his star on the Walk of Fame in Palm Springs. So he's someone that I would say, while I quickly outgrew Trini, but by age 11 or 12, I was completely enamored. And in fact, I thought that he was responsible for If I Had a Hammer.
Okay.
And I didn't know who Pete Seeger was. And
Right.
and I wouldn't find out for another 10 years who Pete Seeger was. But I always thought that Trini Lopez had written such a cool song that
Right.
I wanted to write my own song as good as that one.
Right. Well,
So I loved him, and then something else happened that was also interesting. When I was around 12, a friend of my parents had come back from Liverpool,
mhm.
and this would have been maybe 1962. So I was probably 10 years old, 9 years old. And he had a 45, a small record with two sides. I'm saying this for possible listeners who have no idea what I mean when I'm talking about a 45. It was by the Beatles, and it was their first release.
Okay.
And it came straight from Liverpool. And this friend of my parents said, these guys are very popular in Liverpool right now, and they're called the Beatles. And I heard that information when I was much too young to care. If I had only kept that record, I would have a very serious collector's item.
Oh, what happened to it?
Oh, I have no idea. I know I listened to it because it kind of impacted me. I liked it. But then, like any other 10-year-old, I just moved on.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the Beatles. What are some other bands and artists that you liked as a teenager?
So as we move into my teen years, everything changes. I mean, everything. So all of a sudden, the Beatles become the Beatles to me. And I mean, I could give you a long list of people that I used to listen to, and it's a varied list because it includes French pop music, Italian music, but also American music. And to me, it was this big gumbo of amazing music. So I was very quickly influenced by the English folk scene,
Okay.
people whose names might be a little obscure for some people, but really well-known musicians in England who were part of the folk revival of the early 60s. People like John Renbourn, Bert Jansch. I don't know if those names are familiar to you, but in Europe at that time, these guys were leading a folk revival, and bands like Fairport Convention and Pentangle and King Crimson and so on. So all of that, and then Donovan, who was, extraordinary for me in those early teenage years. And then all of a sudden, this wave of American music hit me like a ton of bricks. I just couldn't get over it. So that would include James Taylor, Neil Young, David Crosby. More than Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, it had more to do with David Crosby, Neil Young, although I did like the four of them together.
Right.
I would include, well, first of all, to me, the Rolling Stones are a very important band. I didn't mention them earlier, so I want to just throw that out there. And certain introspective, wonderful songwriters that I really responded to, people like Leonard Cohen and Nick Drake.
Yes, Nick Drake.
Who was someone that I listened to with great interest, and I was fascinated by just the delicacy of what he did, and of course the tragic nature of his music, and then his passing and all of that. So in a nutshell, the people I just mentioned were really important to me. There was a parallel track. I listened to so much stuff. I also listened to jazz quite a lot. I kind of woke up to jazz maybe when I was around 15 or so. And I started to listen to Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Dave Brubeck. And Brubeck became sort of, in an interesting way, a connection that was formed later in my musical life. And I think maybe I've given you a
Yeah.
general idea. The list could continue if you want to move farther up into my teens and 20s. It would include a whole bunch of other people like Elvis Costello. Let's see, who am I'm forgetting everybody right now, but all the way to people who are more current to me today, like say Wilco, Jeff Tweedy. I don't know. I could go on, but I think I have, and also I have not mentioned any of the French singers that impacted me, but some that a larger public would know would include Jacques Brel.
Yes, yes.
And Serge Gainsbourg, who was a big deal to me as well. Jacques Dutronc, who is not well known in the United States, but was really a brilliant French singer-songwriter.
I like his voice. Yeah, definitely.
Do you know Dutronc?
Yeah.
Jacques Dutronc. Yeah. So anyway, so those are some of the many influences that fed into my own music. And I probably began to write round about the age of 14.
Okay.
And a lot of crappy music, which you have to first go through in order to get something good. I basically learned 3 or 4 chords and realized that entire careers can be built on 3 or 4 chords.
Right.
And are still being built on 3 or 4 chords.
You're right about that. I was just going to ask you about that. So being self-taught on guitar.
Yeah, very much self-taught. And also the impulse to play guitar was really more an impulse to write. So I always wanted to write my own music. And playing guitar was a vehicle for me. So unfortunately, it means that I'm an average guitar player. I'm really not brilliant. I'm average. I'm decent. I am not an excellent musician, and I am completely self-taught. But as a songwriter, that's where all my interest was and continues to be to this day. I think that if I've done anything really well, it's songwriting.
Songwriting, okay. Yeah. You found your true calling.
I did pretty early on. There's a song on Everybody's Own.
Right.
That is really the first good song I ever wrote. And I was 14 when I wrote it, and it's the last track. It's called Autumn Calling. Okay, yeah. And that song was written literally when I was 14, going on 15. And it was after writing, a dozen terrible songs. And then suddenly I hit on that one and I realized I had something. And then 4 years later, when I was 18 and I had Hand as the band, that song became one of the ones we decided to record. Yeah. Well,
talk about the forming of the band.
Okay.
And how everybody got together. You guys were all really young when you got together.
We were, all of us. I mean, it was truly in some ways the epitome of the high school band. We were all in school together. This was a school in Switzerland. So it was a boarding school, which means that we spent 24 hours a day together. So when we weren't in class, we were hanging out as friends. And I met my friend Nick Zoullas when I think I was the equivalent of a junior when the two of us met. And by that time, the band had started to evolve a little bit. But when Nick arrived, it really gelled. And there were 5 or 6 of us at that point. And we used to rehearse in the bathrooms because the echo of the tile in the bathroom and the shower stalls was fantastic. So it gave us the encouragement that we needed before we had any actual mics that we could sing through. So we had an opportunity to rehearse almost every day. So we actually got good. And we made up our minds quickly that the kind of band we wanted to be was not a cover band.
Right.
And we very rarely played anybody else's music, which was a little bit unusual at the time, especially for high school bands. That basically, if you were in high school, you were going to play everybody else's music but your own. And you might squeeze in one of your tracks in the middle of a set. And we reversed that equation, and we played only original music. And for better or worse, we wanted our band to have its own identity. And we didn't want to be known for doing an inferior version of a James Taylor song, let's say. we preferred not to be compared to anyone else, so that we wouldn't suffer.
Right. Well, it sounds like you guys had a certain confidence from early on to do your own material.
So we really did, and I think this was pure serendipity. The fact that Tony Angier and I recognized in each other some of the same qualities. We were both pretty confident that we understood how to write a song on some primal level. We got it. And when the two of us began to play together, it was perfect chemistry. And there was no big ego involved. We were literally helping each other to complete lyrics, to complete the music. The songs on Everybody's Own are the most collaborative songs you can imagine. I am one of two songwriters on that album. There are other albums where I was more, let's say, at the center of the songwriting, but Everybody's Own was an album that I really give enormous credit to everyone for, but particularly to Tony for being my co-writer. And it was just pure magic for me to find someone like that. And then Nick Zoullas came into the picture. And I believe Nick and Tony were rooming together in boarding school. And Nick pulled out his harmonica one day and said, "Hey, I can play a little." And he blew us away. To this day, I think that I will say that I think Nick is one of the best harmonica players out there. Yeah. He's extremely distinctive. If you hear him, you know it's him.
Right. I was going to say about his harmonica playing, it's a mellow style. It's not this, like some of the bands that you hear, even from that time period, is just blowing away on it.
Constant blowing.
Right. No, this was just really complemented the music really well.
I couldn't agree with you more. Although he's entirely capable of sort of getting very bluesy on you, and when the song is appropriate, he can do that. There's a song, the last song on the latest album, Holding Fast, is a kind of blues, and it's not sung by me. It's sung by our singer at the time. Her name is Charlie Tiernan, and Charlie sang that song. It's called Nothing That I Wanted. And if you listen to the way Nick plays harmonica on that, it's still Zoullas, but it has a fierceness that you don't always associate with him. He is melodic, and he loves, for example, playing with a violinist. And we've had several violin players in the band over the years, and the work that the harmonica and the violin arrange together is some of my favorite aspects of our band.
I agree with that, and I like what you guys did with that, and I like what you're doing with it today as well.
Great.
But what were Nick's musical influences?
Well, I think I can't speak 100% for him on that, because he almost came sort of fully formed. He pulled out his harmonica, began to play with one of our songs, and it was right there. I mean, there was hardly anything to explain or to teach. And he's very methodical. He takes notes that, and he wants to be guided and corrected if the need is there. Again, no ego whatsoever. In fact, I would say that he needs to develop an ego, because he's one of the better musicians that we've ever had in the band. But I would say that he listened to all the classic people that you would think of to listen to as a harmonica player, people like anywhere from Paul Butterfield to Stevie Wonder to, or even frankly to Neil Young and Bob Dylan and so on. And by the way, I cannot believe that in my long list of influences I didn't mention Bob Dylan, who is kind of inescapable.
Right.
You can't get around him, you can't get above him, you can't go under him, you're going to run into him. So
yeah, I guess he's kind of the one that just kind of assumed, I can understand that.
You could assume that he would be at the top of any list, and he really is to this day. I'm in absolute awe at the best of his work. I am critical too. There's some stuff I don't think works and is not good, but he's a giant.
Yeah.
He's like Picasso in the world of painting. You can't get around him.
Right. So influential. Yeah.
Yes, you have to deal with him one way or the other.
Right.
Well, for the most part, his best music is some of the best music ever written. So plain and simple. Yeah.
Right. I mean, credit him with being, how many bands and artists have covered his material over the years. I mean, that just.
Well, I mean, it's got to be in the thousands and thousands, obviously. And is likely to continue to be the case for decades.
Right.
I really think that it's going to be very hard to imagine music that will not at some point circle back to him.
Right. I think it will.
Yeah. No, he's absolutely one of the very great musicians.
Yeah. Especially, yeah. I mean, you can tell the mark of a musician that stands the test of time when they're connecting with people 20, 30 years later, 40 years later, whatever. Yeah, it's definitely.
That is absolutely true. And it's funny that you should, I'm not trying to put myself in the same context, but I have to say that one of the most surprising elements to me personally was to discover 38 years after we had made our first album that there were people out there in the world listening to that album as if it had been recorded last week. Right. And one of the funnier aspects of that, I remember that at one point when there was a lot of back and forth about the band online, there was a French online magazine. I can't remember what they're called right now, but they awarded Everybody's Own, recorded in 1972, the best album of 2009. which I found out in 2012. I found out that they had awarded the 1972 album as the best album of 2009. So I thought to myself, well, now that is a nice feeling that something you did when you were 18 and 19 is resonating 40 years later.
Like so many have said, and I said in the introduction, it's timeless. It really is. It has that quality. So
I'm so appreciative of those kinds of compliments. I really do appreciate them. And I don't disagree, because I remember my first impression of our album after it was done and it was mixed and I heard it. It wasn't a very positive impression. I listened to it and I thought there were several things immediately that I heard and I wished we had done differently, which I think is normal. And when I re-listened to the album, literally a couple of decades later, I listened to it again, and I thought it was so much better than I remembered. And then by the time Golden Pavilion got in touch with us to release the 40th anniversary, at that point, I really listened a lot more carefully. And then I discovered that the album really does have a quality. I don't know what it is, but it does. And I can listen to it pretty dispassionately. It's not that I'm, fawning over my own music or anything. I just literally listen to it and think, wow, that is so nice. it's such a nice moment in my life as a musician. I feel very happy with that record.
Yeah, well, you should be. Was there at the time, was there any kind of music scene in Switzerland at all?
Well, there was, but the Swiss tend to be very international in what they listen to. And, there's so many great music festivals that I'm sure you're familiar with several of it. The Montreux Jazz Festival is probably the most famous of all, that attract musicians of every genre to Switzerland. So usually when you're in Switzerland, you're going to listen to a bit of everything.
Okay.
There was a punk scene when there was punk. There was a disco scene when there was disco. There was a rock and folk scene when those genres of music were out there. So that's my impression of Swiss music as such, is international music. Okay. If you look at Switzerland at the heart of Central Europe, you can see how literally you could draw connecting lines to every other country in the world from that center. And so I was very lucky to hear a lot of great music there. I also, at a young age, as a teenager, I went to Montreux many times to see, absolutely legendary bands like Led Zeppelin and Jethro Tull and Procol Harum, and it's just, the list is endless. Yeah. So I was in a real cauldron of exciting music, and it was all right there.
Right there.
Well, it was there.
Talk about how the band signed to Evasion Records. How did that come about?
So this is again one of those stories that seem implausible, but we were performing in a relatively small school-related venue, and in the middle of our set, or at the end of our first set, somebody from Evasion Records came over and talked to me and basically said, "Do you guys write your own songs?" And I said, "Yes, we do." And and he said, "Well, I am with they were known as Evasion in French, Evasion." So I said, "So I'm with Evasion," and at the time, Evasion Records were the top record company in the country. So I had heard of them. I knew who they were, and I knew a couple of musicians who recorded with them. And so this gentleman, whose name was Gaston Scheffer, and Gaston said, "When are you graduating?" And we said, "Well, we're graduating at the end of this academic year." And he said, "Well, how would you like to spend the summer working on an album that we'll record in the fall, and we'll sign you to our label?" And I thought it was a joke. I just laughed and I said, "Come on." And he said, "No, I'm serious. Keep working, keep at it, stay in touch with me. And I'm going to draw up a contract and we're going to make an album if you want to." And Greg, that's literally what happened at the end of our, all of us, I think all of us but one at that point had graduated. And we spent that summer, the summer of 1971, as 18-year-old graduates, high school graduates. And we spent 2 months in a fantastic rehearsal space in an old church in the old city of Lausanne. And the record company took care of us as if we were young stars, which we were not. And they rented the space, they rented the instruments, they set it up. They were there from morning to night, making sure that we had all the comforts of that you would want. And we worked for 2 months and we tightened up and wrote all the songs that are on that album.
Yeah.
So it was really extraordinary. They were kind and they were nurturing as a record company. The one mistake that all of us made, but by the way, This is not something that I blame anyone for. I'm not at all upset about this. I really don't care. But something that I would have done with more understanding and information is I wouldn't have signed over those 12 songs to Evasion Records, which is what I did. Tony and I had no idea. So of course we agreed to let them have the rights, which they kept to this day.
Right.
But I know that they haven't gotten rich on it. But they have been proud of it, and they have sold a good number of records, but not anything that would make me think that I needed to, sue to get my music back or anything like that. I'm not, nor do I think today, like Taylor Swift, that I should re-record everybody's own, so that the new recording of it comes back to me.
Right.
Well, which is what she's doing apparently with her entire catalog.
I think so. Well, chalk it up to you were young and naive,
Oh yeah. But they weren't predatory. I should say that. They really were not. They were not trying to cheat us out of anything at all. I think what they were doing basically is saying to themselves, we're going to invest in this band because we believe in them. The least we can do is cover ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they asked nothing of us, nothing. We didn't pay any money for any aspect of the production, recording, mixing, and releasing of the album.
Yep. Well, talk a little bit about that, the recording process. Were you a little bit intimidated first time being in a studio?
Yeah. Absolutely. It was quite the experience. Also, it was a studio in the city of Bienne in Switzerland. And at the time, it was one of the great recording studios. It was the kind of recording studio that would have recorded a symphony orchestra, a jazz band, or a rock band. In other words, they had the capacity to have all that technology available. So they were not doing this on the cheap.
Right.
They definitely rented the best studio in the country for us to make this album.
Well, it sounds like it. It sounds, the production's wonderful on that album.
It is, and it's funny that it holds up remarkably well. It doesn't sound sort of embarrassingly dated the way certain things do. It doesn't. I'm just thinking of this as I'm speaking. There's another band that I'd like to mention as sort of an emotional influence more than anything else. The Incredible String Band.
Okay, right.
If you happen to know them.
Yes, the Scottish band.
They were so wonderful. And I still love them to this day. I listen to them quite often. But I wanted to throw that in because they brought a kind of weirdness but in a very positive sense, a weirdness and a fantasy to the way they performed and sang and all of that. And I think it had an influence on all of us.
Yeah,
it was a really nice frame of reference.
Yeah. They have been influential across the board too, in other genres as well.
Greg, while we're still on the subject of Everybody's Own, I could tell you, if you'd like, I could give you a short little story about how the album came back into our lives. In other words, after 39 years of not listening or knowing about this record and how it suddenly reemerged. But I'll let you decide if that's of interest or not.
We'll do that as a timeline.
Sure, that's fine.
When we get to that.
It's just an interesting story. That's the only reason I bring it up.
Oh yeah, I definitely want to go over that. Definitely want to talk about the album itself. Go ahead and hold up.
Everybody's Own?
Yes.
Okay. So here it is.
Yeah. Now talk about, I like all of your album covers. I like especially this one.
I'm just showing the
there it is.
Here's the back. Here's the back of it.
I like that, the way that was done too.
Yeah,
Like the negative on the
it's
back.
very cool. It really is.
Well, who did the artwork on the cover?
So we never met the artist.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, we never did. So I don't actually know his name, but I know he's listed here.
Mhm.
Huh. Remastered. I don't see his name right here. But I think this is a really uniquely interesting cover.
Very much.
He came up with this wonderful concept of it's just the way he managed to include urban elements, the buildings, the hand reaching out for the everybody zone. It was very clever,
Yeah.
and beautifully done. I'm just noticing here, which I hadn't paid attention to before. It says remastered at MTX Studios in Montreux. So again, these are just top flight places to be involved with. So we were very lucky. And Evasion Records did not do this on the cheap. They did a great job for us.
Okay, talking about the album itself. I must say that the musicianship is very professional, and it belies your youth at the time of recording. You know, you talked about how young you guys were.
Yeah,
The guitar playing throughout, soft and melodic. I think that's what makes it stand out, at least to me. And again, that's right up my alley. It's hard to pick out my favorite song on my top, but guess I'll have to go with the title track.
Everybody's own.
Right. It's a wonderful song, and I love the second guitar coming in a little, probably, what is it, a minute through, into the song, and then throughout the song. I think that just makes it.
Well, so that was something that there were three guitarists involved there. Tony, myself, and Jean-Jacques Gauer, who was a friend, again, a member of the band on that first album. And we worked that out very carefully. Tony and I basically wrote the song. Mm-hmm. The melodic line that you hear, I could hum it, but it's a da 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 da. Anyway, that long melodic line was created as a result of us playing together for a couple of hours and then gradually bringing it out. The basic structure of that melodic line was written by Tony. Okay. I introduced the melody on top of it.
Right.
And Jean-Jacques brought in the sort of that lovely 12-string guitar sound in the background. And it ended up being a song in 3 distinct parts. Okay. The third part being sort of the most dramatic in that the drums are suddenly there. And then all of a sudden we're sounding like Roger McGuinn and the Byrds, and we're going in that direction with the song. And then at the end, it finishes in a very quiet, right, silent, almost meditative final note.
There are some songs, that was a lengthier song track on the album.
Yes.
That from some artists, they're really long, and you can tell they're long. It's like, okay, can we get on with this? And
oh, yeah.
you become bored with the song.
Bored with the,
but not this one. Not this one.
Well, that's nice of you to say.
Yeah.
An interesting detail about that recording. After we all sort of disbanded and left in different directions, Gaston, the CEO of Evasion Records, was so enamored of Everybody's Own that there was a time in his life soon after where he was in the hospital for about a month recovering from something. And while he was in the hospital, to occupy his time, he wrote an entire chart of Everybody's Own to be performed by a symphony orchestra.
Wow.
And And to my absolute amazement, when I saw him again in 2012, when we were in Switzerland together, he said, "Mark, I have a surprise for you, something you've probably never heard in your life." And we were in his house, and all of a sudden, out of his speaker system comes Everybody's Own blasting at me, performed by members of the Lausanne Symphony Orchestra, a whole section of horns, violins, cellos, drums, electric piano, acoustic piano, and background vocals. It was, it was worthy. It was an epic rendition of Everybody's Own. We were just floored because, of course, we had never heard it.
Right.
And that's when Gaston said, "I did this basically as a tribute to all of you and as a way to find something valuable and productive to do while I was sick in the hospital." So that recording, as far as I know, does not exist out there, but I have a copy of it. and it is a wonderful thing. I haven't listened to it in years, but it's such a, it just felt like such a gesture of confidence.
Right. I would love to hear that. I would love to hear
it's not, I have to say though, however, that my favorite version by a long shot is ours.
Mm-hmm.
But the other one is on a level of sort of bombast and production that I had never imagined it to be that way. And it was pretty stunning.
Yeah.
Pretty stunning.
I would think so. Well, see, that tells you there that you guys were very talented, not just talented, but mature for your age. How many, producers or whatnot would want to do something like that with a song from teenagers? Normally, that it would be someone or a group that is more seasoned, that has been around for a lot more, to want to even, that just tells you right there that you guys were very, very beyond your age, and to think through that process, like you said, how you guys wrote the song itself,
Well, I think it's funny. I think we were very mature as a band and as young people emotionally. But none of us, except the piano player, really, none of us were top flight musicians in our own, none of us was the great guitarist or the great, bass player. We had a good instinct for what we could do, and we didn't venture where we felt that we were out of our depth.
Right.
So we found a great deal to do with what little we had.
I was going to say, maybe you guys found that out early, that complimenting each other. If you just took your guitar, on that one track and just listen to that, maybe it's not so good.
But we were
everything together.
We were very careful. One thing we did very well is listen to each other.
Right.
So when we were in rehearsal, we weren't in our own heads. We were always listening to the other person or the other three people or the other four people to make sure that everything was connecting. And I think that made us into more mature musicians than we really were.
Right.
And it gave the lie to the fact that you can't make good music when you're a teenager. I mean, there's no reason why that's not possible. But we never thought of it one way or the other. We didn't think of us as being young. We didn't think of ourselves as having anything particularly unusual except the music. We really believed that we had, at the core of what we were doing, we believed in ourselves,
right.
Without arrogance, but with a lot of confidence.
Yeah. Well, it definitely comes through in spades. A close second. A close second would be Time Will Change Your Season.
So that's one of my favorites.
Yeah. The instruments in that, they all complement each other very well. I think it's a very accomplished track.
Thank you for singling that one out. When I listened to the album today,
Mhm.
I think it's the one, if I were to choose a song and say, this is how good we could be at that time, that's the one I would have chosen.
Right.
Because I think we played every aspect of that song came out perfectly.
I,
And so this is a good opportunity to bring up Teresa Behrens at the time. She's now she's married to one of my oldest friends. In fact, we wouldn't have had Teresa as a band member back then. She was the female vocalist on Everybody's Own. She's still one of my best friends.
good.
Her husband is one of my best childhood friends. And it was me talking to my friend Nick and saying, we need a female vocalist on this album. We don't know anybody. Do you have any contacts in other schools or whatever? And within a week or so, he said, well, I've met this woman this girl is unbelievable. You've got to hear her. And we arranged an audition. And Teresa came in, all of 18 years old, lovely. And she sang like a mixture of Judy Collins and Joan Baez. And we listened and we just said, well, my God, you want to be in the band? And she said, sure. And that's how we became band members. I should add that my friend Nick married her soon, a few years later, and they've been together for decades. So they are, it's quite the story. I asked him to find me a singer and I found him a wife.
A wife.
so it's quite extraordinary.
It worked out for everybody then.
It worked out for all of us. It was perfect. And we are still the best of friends. So that's one of the loveliest parts of my memories of Everybody's Own include Teresa coming in.
Yes. Well, thank you for that backtrack
Yeah.
too. Another track on there, Leaves. I like the beginning, the standout echoey vocals. I like that part in the beginning of that song. Really nice.
Did you notice how halfway through the song, the echo recedes.
Right.
And the song continues in a very natural way.
Right.
But the echo is gone.
Right.
Now that was not a decision we made. That was a decision made at the mixing board without our approval. So the first time we heard Leaves, we were taken aback. We could not understand what they had done. And nor could we understand why they faded the echo out and went back to the more natural recording. And to us, it was jarring. And I remember we all had a conversation about it back then. And we said, why did they do that? Of course, now in retrospect, and for many years now, I think they made an incredibly smart and wonderful decision. I think it's a standout decision to make at the mixing board.
Mm-hmm.
Someone, I don't know who, said, you know what, let's put some echo in here. Let's put a little more echo than you'd normally have, and let's fade it out.
Fade it out, right.
And I think it created another layer of interest in the song.
Right.
And I also like it very much. Yeah.
So,
And it's also, that's one of those songs, when I hear it, it sounds very young to me.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a song appropriately written for a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old romance.
Okay. I can hear that. I can hear that. Yeah.
Keep on rolling me in the leaves, and I met you only yesterday. That's not a bad line for a 16-year-old.
Right. Tell me about it. That's true.
Yeah.
Very
yes. Anyway,
another one off of there, Who. I like the dual guitars in that one, and the dual vocals. It worked really nice.
Thank you. You're really singling out some things these are all songs that really still resonate for me.
Yeah.
Also, I think Teresa has an absolute highlight moment in the song.
Yeah.
Several times when her voice kicks in, it's a very interesting contrast with my own. I mean, I had a very young voice then. very modest. Let's put it that way. He had a modest voice, but again, I think the closest analogy to my singing at the time would have been Nick Drake.
Right. I can hear that. Yeah.
I think I was the kind of singer that Nick Drake was, in that it was more of an introspective singing.
Right.
It was less, I never belted anything. And if you listen to those songs, I never developed that kind of singing style at all for that album. And I think probably for the rest of my music, I'm not, I don't have those pipes, but I also don't have that inclination for myself.
Well, yeah, and I don't
It doesn't
think
fit what I do.
it would work real well with the type of music if you were more of a belter, or
Right.
again, it's complementary. I think,
Yeah.
you know, your voice definitely works well. It's nice, it's pleasant, you know.
Right. It's intimate. I think when I hear it at its best, it sounds intimate to me.
Yeah.
And there's a song on the album, maybe you're going to mention it, but there's a song called Chubby's Song. And it literally sounds to me when my voice pops in over Tony's guitar. He's the one who's playing he's finger picking, and my voice kicks in, and it literally, to me, it sounds like somebody whispering in your ear. When I awoke, there was sun in the room. People were talking. I thought of a tune, and there's just something about it. It has a narrative quality, and it seems to sort of enter your ear in a very intimate way. So that was the best I could do at that point.
A lot of elements working. You guys had a lot of things going on. Yeah, yeah. Very mature minded, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, now here's one. Seven Sad Sisters. Beautiful track. Sounds like a traditional folk song.
Very much so.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, it's a pure folk, this track. And I know a lot of bands, folk bands and artists would kill for a song like that. Yeah.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. I remember perfectly when Jean-Jacques Gower, who played 12-string guitar on the album, when Jean-Jacques came to us with the basic melody, which was clearly a British folk staple melody.
Right.
And I responded to it immediately. And I remember exactly where I was. This is not the case with most things, but I remember exactly where we were. We were in the rehearsal space in Lausanne, in this old church. Jean-Jacques played the melody, and I sat in a chair to the side. And in 25 minutes or so, I wrote the lyrics. And I brought the lyrics back to Jean-Jacques, and the two of us sat down, and I sang the lyrics that are there over the melody. And of course, the minute Teresa sang it, we all sort of stepped back and said, okay, this could be Sandy Denny. This could be one of those moments.
Right.
But I love Teresa's voice on that song, and the way she conveys that beautiful. It's a strange. The lyric is very odd, but it shows you that I was at the time listening to a lot of British folk music, and it was, again, it had this kind of weirdness about it. These seven sad sisters living alone. You know, none of them married, though all of them grown, and so on. And so,
well, again, I mean, most folk songs are tragic. You know,
yes,
it's either you know, a lover that's spurned, or that the one lover kills the other, or, you know, and these kind of things.
There's always a murder. There's always a murder or some violent death involved.
Right.
I think the lyrics of that song don't lead to a murder, but they presuppose that these seven women have some big stories to tell.
That's true. They're very omenous, you know.
Yeah, there's something about them. If you could sit down with any one of them, they'd tell you something that you didn't know. Well,
you mentioned earlier Autumn Calling. That was my next track. that's just a great track. That's all I can say about. I mean, not all I could say, but that it's just
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah.
So that one is just, that's the only track I believe on the record where it's just my guitar and voice and Nick's harmonica.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Nobody else involved in it.
Yeah. Simplified.
Yeah. Also, I don't think I can't swear to this, but I don't think we did more than 2 or 3 takes. And that was it. In the studio, meaning that it just came out the way it did.
Oh, okay. Well, which song did you have the most takes on?
Everybody's Own.
Okay. Okay.
Because it was the one that required the most sort of a certain kind of precision, because the song has these 3 very different sections to it, and being able to string them all together in one, in one sweep was not easy. The other thing we did with this album, a lot of this record was recorded live.
Okay.
So there were not 100 overdubs and all of that. To a great degree, we recorded live. And that became something that I always enjoyed more as I kept recording and making music. I love the sound of a band, taking off together and not necessarily layering instrument upon instrument upon instrument.
Right.
I love a good live take is a thrilling experience.
I agree. And sometimes it can be too complicated when you try to do too many overdubs and mixes to it and all that kind of
It does depend. It does depend on the kind of music you're doing, but I like the immediacy of a live performance.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that I don't also like the idea of, throwing in a piano if it's not there or whatever. But for the most part, there's nothing like a good live recording.
Right.
And I know Bob Dylan, for example, favors that in a big way. I mean, for good and ill, it depends. But he does not like to revisit things. He likes to go in the studio and let's do it. And sometimes he doesn't even tell his musicians what key they're in, but they dive in.
Uh-huh. I had one interview I have to tell you that I did a while back. The band, the first time they went in to record, and I can't remember the producer's name. Anyway, what he did was he said, "Okay, guys, just do a run through," and they thought they were practicing the song, but he was really recording it.
Did it become the take?
Yeah, it did. So really, it was live, done live, and they didn't have time to get nervous.
Well, that's one of the cool things about, if you're not too self-conscious, you're likely to do a better job.
Right. Well, two more tracks I wanted to add.
Sure.
This album, most albums that I really like, if I really like it, it's one of my favorite albums. I have a standard. If I like more than half the songs on it, then it's one of my top albums. And I even started a list too.
Yeah, I get that.
So if it's like 11 songs, 6 of them, if I like 6, then I put it on that list. Yours was about 8, I think. so
Well,
it's
thank you.
very rare that an album
feel
is,
that way?
Yeah, that I feel that way. But the other 2 tracks on there, the instrumental Levi's Lullaby, I like that, and I Drive.
Very different one.
Yeah, and then I Drive is the other one. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Levi's Lullaby was primarily Tony's song, more than mine. And Tony and Nick worked out the harmonica guitar part, and I helped with the arranging and playing, but it was mostly Tony's song. Yeah. A good
one. Well, Evasion.
Yes, good for you.
didn't print a whole lot of copies for release, right? But they did sell out quickly.
They sold out very quickly, and from what I understand, and again, this is I don't have 100% guarantee of this, but from what I understand, they did do several more printings of the album and also sold them.
Okay.
And then once they ran out of however many thousands of records they put out there, then they didn't make, excuse me, they didn't make any more of them. But by then the album had pretty much traveled the globe, so that we ended up having pockets of, fans, for want of a better word, in all kinds of places. I mean, in China, we have a very devoted, tiny fan base in China, who have been in touch with Nick, with me, just telling us how much they appreciate the music of Hand, and the new music and the old music. And they even made one day we received a box in the mail from a city in China. And we opened it up, and it was mugs that they had made, that they actually, like out of clay and so on, they made these lovely mugs with the word Hand, our best music on it. And it was just the sweetest thing, to get a gift like that. So we have listeners dotting the globe. We have people who listen to us in Germany, in France, and in Hong Kong, and it's the way the world is today.
Yeah, well, like the Golden Pavilion,
Well, that was as big a surprise as any, was Golden Pavilion. And I had never heard of Golden Pavilion before they got in touch.
Right.
And the guy at Golden Pavilion, Antonio, who is Portuguese, got in touch. I think he got in touch with Nick first, because he was trying to figure out if he might be the same Nick Zoullas who is on an album called Everybody's Own, and and he referred to it in his letter as a seminal record for its day that is about to reach its 40th anniversary, and I would like my record company to reissue it in a deluxe edition of, limited edition and so on. And we all thought it was a joke. I mean, we didn't believe it. At first, we just laughed. Turned out to be absolutely authentic. And of course, the rest is minor history.
Well, talk, at the time, thinking back to when it was released, do you recall any critics' reviews or anything like that?
At the time that it was released, not at all. I literally have no recollection, none.
Yeah.
When the album resurfaced in my consciousness, I didn't realize that it had been available. Somebody was making CDs of it and selling the CDs online. And I actually bought my own CD so I could check it out. And this was back in 2011, maybe, just before we reformed the band. And the story of how that band came back is really a weird one. I mean, have I mentioned yet that I was a teacher?
Right. Not yet, but I was going to ask you about that too.
So I'll wait.
Okay.
Until you get around there.
Going back to so you guys at this time, you just graduated and everything. So was this just kind of like a one-off album idea for you guys, and why you didn't record another album?
So for us, it felt kind of like a one-off. Not for the record company, however. They thought that this was going to be the first of many. And it shows you a little bit how naive we were in those days, and how unappreciative we were of the opportunity that was being granted to us here. In that sense, I think we really blew it, because these folks were ready to set up a tour for us, to have us tour some of the local festivals, to basically to put us on the map. But there were, at that point, 5 or 6 of us, all of whom had different plans for our lives. I was going to go to the United States for the first time since I was a little kid. I was going to go back to the States. I was going to go to college. Nick Zoullas was going to go back home to the States. Tony Angier was going back. Everybody had their own, I guess everybody's own. So
Right.
so everybody's own project got taken over, and we disbanded. And it's hard to imagine today, but in 1972, it was possible to get lost.
Yeah.
You could actually lose track of someone. Today, it's inconceivable. But in those days, the record company actually made an effort to find us. And we really just let them go. And one of the more poignant moments in my life was in 2012 when we went back to Switzerland, and Gaston invited us to have lunch at his house. We hadn't seen him in 40 years. And we came to his door, and Gaston came out of his door and he looked at me and he burst into tears. And he gave me this lovely hug, and he said to me, "Where have you been?" And that was a moment that it'll stay with me forever, because it made me understand how much emotionally, musically, monetarily they had invested in us, and how quickly we just vanished in the wind. Right. We disappeared. So that's the way that played out. And I went on to several more years of playing music, but in a completely different context for me, which was super exciting. When I moved to upstate New York, and I became sort of a member of what was a very active folk rock community in Saratoga Springs, New York. Okay. And that's a whole other story, but that is what happened to me after Everybody's Own, and after I began to live in the States.
Right. Well, I think part of that adds a certain mystique or mystery that you guys just did one album and then you
That's
vanished,
true.
you know,
and then vanished.
And I think that's the allure for fans years later, to say, it's intriguing, thinking about that, what happened to them, and this album was so wonderful, what could have been.
They make another one. Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think part of the fascination with the album is the vanishing of the band.
Yeah.
As if we had all landed on spaceships to do our thing, and then took off and went back to our other planet.
We'll talk about how you did get involved becoming a Spanish teacher.
Well, that happened sort of in the way that certain things happen in life that you don't think of ahead of time. Circumstances just lead to it. And I fell into the teaching profession almost as a lark. It was something that there was a job available in Greenwich, Connecticut. I was beginning to think that I was going to be leaving upstate New York, Saratoga Springs, where I'd been living and going to college for a couple of years. And I thought that this job came up, and I knew that I was qualified as a speaker of Spanish. I knew that I could teach Spanish. I knew I could teach French. And I thought, well, let me go in and interview. And I really had basically the most ridiculous interview, because I was on my way to New York to visit friends. And I literally told the person who was interviewing me, look, I hope this isn't going to take too long, because I have to catch a train in 45 minutes. This is me looking for a job. And amazingly, the gentleman who interviewed me, it turned out he became a very close friend. He said to me, "Mark, the thing that sealed the deal for me was when you told me you didn't have time for the interview. Because you said, by then I knew you were qualified, but I didn't know how much I was going to like you. And so you told me that you had to take a train to go into New York to meet your friends. So what happened is 3 days later, I got a phone call and I was told that I was basically down to 3 people. They were down to 3 people. I was one of them. How badly did I want the job? And at that point I said, well, I'd really like to have the job. They said, fine, then it's yours. And that kicked off a career in teaching that lasted a total of about 35 years.
Wow. Okay.
But within a range of about 35 years, I took a 7-year hiatus from teaching and then went back to teaching. And during those 7 years, I worked in the art business in New York, primarily in New York. I had contacts with I was a partner in a gallery in Soho, and my wife, Marcia, who you met briefly at the beginning here, and I and my father started a consulting company to buy and sell works of art for private collectors. And I joined them for a period of about 7 years, decided at the end that it was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my career. And I was actually missing teaching. And I was able to get a very good job that I held on to for another 25 years.
Yeah.
So
teaching was probably missing you too.
Well, I'd like to think that I was a really bad teacher my first year, because I was so young that I had more in common with my students than I did with my colleagues.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I was 23 and my students were 17 and 18. Okay. So I mean, there were 4 years separating us. My youngest colleague was like 39, you know, so I mean, it was obvious to me that I was closer. I was going to be more like a kid than like a teacher. And during my first year of teaching, I learned that I really had to make a sea change in my own understanding of what I was doing. That I had to understand that you can't be a student and a teacher all at once. You have to. There are some lines that need to be drawn. And at the end of my first year of teaching, a very nice student of mine pulled me aside and he said, I just want to say something to you. I've so enjoyed having you in my senior year and you being a first year teacher. I really enjoyed our contact, but I have to tell you something. I said, go right ahead. And he said, you have to remember that you are not one of us. You are not a student. You are a teacher. So be happy about that. Embrace that. And don't be concerned about anything else. And you know something? To hear that kind of wisdom coming out of a 17-year-old,
right,
18-year-old, when I was 23, he nailed it.
Yeah.
He absolutely nailed it. He was right. And I learned soon thereafter, but a lot over the years, I learned how to balance the contact that you want to have with your students, and at the same time to, you know, not to be embarrassed of the fact that we are on 2 different sides of a divide. Right. And we're pulling each other back and forth all the time, communicating all the time. But there is something that makes a teacher and a student a student.
Yeah, always keep
if you mess too much with that,
yeah, that's true.
The formula begins to malfunction.
That's very true. Glad you learned that. Yeah, keeping the professionalism in it. Exactly. Well, now moving forward now to 2012. The
That's a jump.
Yeah, that's a jump. Well, talk about how the reunion came about in 2012.
Okay, so it started with this letter that arrived from Antonio Barreros of Golden Pavilion, who wrote and basically said that he was looking for us. And if we happened to be the right people, could we please respond? And so we did respond. And then we realized that he was on the level and that he was very interested in re-releasing this album. And at that point, none of us, certainly Nick and I had not listened to that record in, I don't know, I probably hadn't listened to it in 20 years. And I was in class. This is sort of an unusual moment. I mean, this is not something that happens to everybody. It was the end. It was on a Friday. It was the last period of the school day. And I was with an AP Spanish class. Mm-hmm. And I got along well with them and we had a nice rapport. So I said to them in the last few minutes of class, I told them, I got this really strange email from somebody in Portugal who claims to want to re-release an album that I made when I was your age. And I don't even know what to make of it. I said, would you like to hear the letter he wrote? And they all said, what? I said, yeah, let me read you the letter. So I read them the letter and they were all just stunned. They were staring at me because you have to realize that once you've been identified as something particular, it's hard for anyone to assume that there's another dimension to your life.
Right. Yeah.
You know, what you mean? You were a musician. You were young once. You were like us. How could that be? So one of the kids very smartly said, well, you know, there's a very easy way to know. Let's just go online and see if your music shows up somewhere. And I said, well, sure. And she said, can I come to your computer? And I said, sure. So she came to my computer, sat down, and 1 minute later, so she just typed Everybody's Own hand, and it popped up on a site, I don't remember where anymore, where they were selling albums, and it was literally sandwiched between a Jay-Z album and I think it was Beyonce.
Oh, wow.
And right smack in the middle, incongruously, is Everybody's Own, and there's the album, unmistakably my album. And at this point, I have 15 students crammed around my computer looking, going, is that your record? I said, yeah. So well, let's click on it. So we click on it, all the tracks appear. And we started to play the first song, The Load. We played The Load. And it was me. Mm-hmm. And they all stood there and looked and said, is that you? And I said, yeah, that's me at 18. And here's a wonderful moment. This very smart girl standing right next to me said, so right now, as I'm listening to you, that's your 18-year-old voice? That's you? And I said, yes, it is. And she said, but I'm 18. I said, well, I know you're 18. And she said, but what that means is that you're 18 right there and I'm 18 right now. That means we're both 18.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, that is a profound insight.
Yeah.
And I've never forgotten it. And it turned out to be, it turned out to be like a I'm forgetting the word I want to use, but it evoked something that eventually began to happen, which is that as the band reformed, and I was in my late 50s, I began to connect with people who were 17, 16, 18 years old in a very profound way. And the band all of a sudden became this joint venture between generations. Mm-hmm. I should mention something that Nick and I had talked about, but it was really Nick's concept of the band as it restarted in 2013 was he basically said, let's make it our mission to write great music for younger musicians to play that is completely original music and give them the opportunity to record that music and to be in the marketplace if they choose to be. And so it became somewhat altruistic. I mean, we never got back into it thinking we were going to become successful. We went back into it thinking that our definition of success was going to be to make the best albums we could make that would compare with anything in the market.
Mm-hmm.
But that the opportunity to play on those tracks would be given to people who haven't yet had that chance, and mostly younger people. And that's exactly what we did.
Yeah. Well, you have used quite a revolving door of talent.
We did.
And I know you and Nick being the mainstays.
We were the mainstays from the first album.
Yeah.
And then everybody else was new from that point moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So each album that we made subsequent to the very first one. So the first one we made is called The Other Side of the World. And it looks like this.
Yeah. See, there's another great album cover.
Isn't it beautiful?
Yeah. Now, where is that taken? Where is that taken?
So that was taken in California, I think.
Okay.
But I should mention about this cover and almost all the other covers. Several of the other covers were taken by a photographer and a very close friend, Alexis Gerard, who took the pictures and the cover shots of all but 2 of our albums. And Alex also happens to have been the one who named the band back in high school. He called us. He said, "You should be Hand," and we said, "Why not?" And that was that.
Okay.
And so that became a real. I mean, it was a moment when Alex named us, and we all embraced the name and stuck with it. But yeah, this was the first album, and from here moving forward, everybody we played with. We had some members that stayed on for the next album, some who dropped out, replaced by others. We had one circumstance where 2 albums later, 3 of the musicians who had been on the first album came back to the third album. So there was a lot of back and forth.
Could you say they were similar to projects, each album?
Not in a conscious way. In other words, we didn't think of them as albums with some sort of thematic connection.
Okay.
But they became albums that were thematic. Sometimes you write songs and you don't realize that when you put them all together, they're going to be expressing a certain mood or an idea that you don't realize you're working on until it's done. And then you listen to it and you say, "Oh my God, this is a concept album. I didn't know it was a concept album."
Yeah.
And that happened more than once. I would say the strongest element of a concept album was a record called Dream to Ride.
Okay.
Which is this one right here.
Yeah. 2016.
2016.
See, now that's another great album cover right there.
So this one is from Marsha.
Okay.
So my wife took this album cover.
Oh, she did.
Yeah, Alexi took the back cover, which I absolutely adore as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
These are really unique, gorgeous photographs. And so I would say Dream to Ride in 2016 was the closest thing to a concept album that we didn't realize we were making. Right. Because so many of the songs were really explorations of love and friendship.
Right.
And how they overlap.
Right.
And how they create a kind of magic that self-destructs. The last track of Dream to Ride is a song called "How Deep Can You Drown a Broken Heart?" And when you get to the end of the song, we literally orchestrated a complete falling apart of all the instruments, so that if you listen to the last track, it literally breaks down.
It breaks down.
And so it was after the fact that we listened to the record and it became obvious to me that this was an album that really had an arc. There was all the songs in some way or other touched upon love and friendship and the potential for great joy and great sorrow in the midst of it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, hold up. We do have a little time. I like to give you my the tracks that I'm partial to.
I would love to hear that.
Okay. Hold up on the other side of the world again, real quick. There. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, that's. I mean, a lot could be said, you know, about that. I mean, it's just the wide open space and then the two chairs right there. You know,
It's pretty marvelous, and the two empty chairs.
too empty, and exactly.
And also the weirdness, the absolute weirdness of these two chairs sitting there.
Right. They're out of
And
place.
what are they looking at?
Right. Exactly. For that was really really a cool concept to come up with that. I think this album right here. I think it's my favorite of your later albums.
Really? I'm
yeah,
so pleased. That's great.
So, I like the guitar work and Feather in the Wind. Yeah.
So that's a song that I am really proud of. I'm very proud of it. I do wish that I could re-record it, because we were really very innocent in the studio when we made this album, and we did not use a click track.
Okay.
Which do I need to explain to anyone what that is, or? But basically, yeah, it's basically something that helps all the band members stick to the exact same beat, so that the bass player isn't off with a piano player and the drummer and so on. And I remember that all of us found the kick track really distracting.
Yeah. So
we decided not to use it. And if there's one song where we should have used it, it's Feather in the Wind, which is one of my favorite songs. And if I ever make another album, I would love to try and do it again in a way where there's certain glaring parts in the song where I can just feel one instrument falling behind and catching up. But that may be more of a personal issue. It might not be apparent to a listener.
Yeah, I didn't hear that, but I'll go back and listen again now that.
Yeah, but you see, I probably shouldn't have said that.
You shouldn't have said that.
I shouldn't have said that, but I do think that there's a tendency on the part of most musicians to want to revisit things that they feel didn't get done perfectly. But overall, I'm very happy with this album.
Yeah. And
I love the songs that are on it.
Yeah. The title track is another one. Yeah.
Yeah, The Other Side of the World. So that was sung by Marielle.
Okay.
Who she sang on 3 albums and became a very dear friend and a collaborator. So she is, after Tony, she became my closest collaborator in terms of songwriting and making new music. So on the album Little Heartaches that follows this one, she and I wrote several of the songs together, where I contributed the melody and she contributed many of the lyrics. And basically we would work together as a team and did some really good work. I'm very proud of the music that we wrote, and we became excellent friends. And she was on 3 albums. Okay. And she is the granddaughter of Dave Brubeck.
That's right.
Which is interesting from the point of view that when I was 17 years old and I had written a song on Everybody's Own called Shifting Lead, that song was my tip of the hat to Dave Brubeck. And if you listen to it again, you'll hear, a kind of again, just a hint of Take 5,
Yes,
which is his most famous track. And the incredible thing is that at age 17, I sort of did this deliberate tip of the hat to Dave Brubeck. And at age 60, I'm working with his granddaughter and becoming friends, you know. So there was something really lovely about that.
Yeah, yeah.
The you know, the way generations can connect, and the way,
like you said about your student, 18 and 18.
right, exactly right.
The same kind
That she understood that I could be 18 on that album, and
Yeah.
she could be 18 today, and
Yeah.
that made us both 18. And I think that ended up having the ring of truth with several of those young musicians. I mean, we all became, when we were playing music, we were as close and involved with each other as you can imagine. Wonderful relationships.
Yeah. A couple of other tracks off of that album.
Yeah.
I like the piano and harmonica, and Since You've Gone. I like that with it, done real well there. And then The Hard Way is a very good song.
Thank you. The Hard Way is another one that I would love to do again, not because I don't like the one on this album, but because I know that I would do it somewhat differently today, and I'd be curious to know how it would develop. But I'm very fond of that song.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's particularly strong lyrically. I like the story it tells.
Yes.
About that kind of person who always does it the hard way.
Hard way.
No matter.
Don't we know people like that?
Yes.
We
yes, we do. And there's just something about that. I think it's a theme that probably resonates with people who listen and recognize themselves in it, or they recognize their brother or sister or a friend. Or
right, exactly. Yeah, a lot of songs are what I call mirrors. You know, it's like you see yourself in it. Yeah,
very much so.
Yep.
There are many songs. There are many songs that don't seem to be about me until I listen to them, and then I recognize myself in the song, and then I realize that I've anticipated something. Mm-hmm. This is a common occurrence. A lot of songwriters say this, that you write your music not 100% sure of what you're saying until the song reflects back to you.
Right.
Something essential about yourself that you didn't realize you were dealing with.
Right.
And that's happened to me on a number of occasions.
Yeah. Hold up, Little Heartaches.
Sure.
Let's see, hold it up there, if you would.
So Little Heartaches is a very special album. Again, now this is an Alex Gerard photograph, and take a look.
Yeah, see, that's another one.
That's a stunning picture.
Yes, it is.
And
I like the way the wind is blowing the
well, that's it. I mean, he caught the wind blowing the cover off that table. I mean, it's just fantastic. Yeah. The coolest picture. I love it. Yeah. I also happen to love the back, which is it was a wall in the old city of Lausanne, where the two of us were walking together, and there was an empty frame. Yeah. And he took a picture of the wall and the empty frame, glass frame on the wall, and then we inserted the name hand, Little Heartaches. Yeah. It's a very cool album.
That definitely works.
This record has extraordinary memories attached to it, because we were able as a band to travel to Italy and record this album in Florence. So all of us went to Italy. We spent 2 weeks together in Siena and Florence, and created that album there. So, I mean, that's an experience that all of us who were there will never forget.
Never forget.
No, we can't forget that.
Well, a couple of tracks, and let's see if one of these, or maybe both of these, are what you're referring to earlier. Time and Time Again is really, really nice. That one.
Thank you.
And then I like the message, and it's the little things, because it is the little things that matter. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So time and time again is one that I wrote by myself, performed it with Marielle primarily. She's literally on every part of that song, I believe. She sings with me, and I think she carries the basic melody all the way through. And that's a song that I wrote a number of years before making the album. And it does resonate. It always reflects back to me. And the song, It's the Little Things, is a song that Marielle and I wrote together, literally sitting on a couch at a table with a pen and paper and the guitar. And we came up with a concept of it. I came up with a melody. We really got into it. And I think we nailed it. It's one of those songs that manages to capture the exuberant joy of being with someone that you adore, and at the same time, the fear of losing them.
Yeah.
It's a strong song, I think. And it's still, I would say it's a sentimental favorite of mine when I hear it. I remember when Antonio, the Golden Pavilion guy, was in the studio and he heard us working on that song. And Antonio said to me, very prescient thing that he said, you know, Mark, years from now, when everyone has gone off and done their own thing, that song is the one that everyone will hear and they'll have their heart in their throat.
Right.
You will be moved in a special way by this song. And he's right.
Uh-huh.
He's right. When I listen to it, I have this weird mix of melancholy and great joy.
Right.
All mixed in together with that particular song.
Wow. Have you had comments from your fans on that song?
Yes, I've had several people refer to it as their favorite. I think it has a catchy quality to it that if it had ever received radio play, it might have had a chance to catch on. But
yeah.
That's all right. That's
Well,
not something I've ever looked for.
hold up 2016's Dream to Ride.
Sure. So that's the one that you had just looked at. Where is it? This is Dream to Ride.
Yep, there we go. And again, the album cover. The 3 tracks that I like from that one are you mentioned it, I Can't Remember My Country.
Sure.
Where the Snow Falls.
I love that song.
Yes. I love songs about snow. I just love songs about. So I
that's the perfect one for you.
Yeah, I went into it already with a predisposition to. I think I'm going to like this one. And then So Free, the violin, and So Free.
So those are really very important songs to me. It's an opportunity for me to say a couple of words about one of the band members who has been most consistently on every album, along with Nick Zoullas and myself. And he is Arnie Sabatelli. And Arnie is a guitarist, singer, songwriter. The song Where the Snow Falls is his song, and it's his vocal.
Okay.
It was arranged by the band, but written and performed by Arnie. He is a very important member of Hand to me from the very beginning of the renaissance of the band. In other words, from 2013 going forward. He was not on the most recent album because I made that album in California, and he is in Connecticut and couldn't be out here. But up to that point, he's been on every single album, and he is an essential member of the band. When I think of people coming and going in the band, there are basically 3 of us that I think of as indispensable. And Nick is one of them. I'm the other one, and Arnie is the third, and we're sort of this triangle. It's not to minimize the contributions of everybody else. It's just this reality. Maybe it's because the three of us are the oldest and we're all within a few years of each other, the same generation, basically. And I think there's a depth of connection among the three of us that outlasts the moment.
Okay.
And it's a very special thing. I think Arnie's very, very talented. He's a great writer. I mean by that, an essayist, writer.
Okay.
He is a Hemingway scholar. He is a man of many dimensions. He plays classical guitar, and basically he brings all these skills into play when we're together as a band.
Okay. Okay. Nice to give him some his due.
Oh, you bet. You bet.
Pin It on the Wind from 2017. Go ahead and hold that
Let
one.
me show that. Let me show that album.
Here.
There it is.
There we go. There we
This
go.
is also an Alex Gerard cover.
I love it with
Very surreal.
Yes. Again, what a concept with
and very cloudy on the back.
yes, very cloudy. Yeah. Thanks for showing the back because I'd only seen the front.
Now the backs are really gorgeous. And here's a shot of the band. The large image. I don't know if it's showing up on the screen, but that's all of us back in 2017
Yep.
when we made this album. And this album has some of my own favorite songs, but I would say that a high point in our band is Pin It on the Wind, the song.
Okay.
It's one that I feel very strongly about.
Okay.
I think it's a powerful song about a breakup. And it also has three distinct sections to it that they still thrill me when I listen.
When you listen, well, that's always a good sign, you know.
Yes.
Couple of favorites, mine, Alabaster Moon,
Yes.
and Waves Roll On. I like
Oh, that's
that
great. So you picked the second song by Arnie Sabatelli.
one. Okay. Okay.
So Arnie wrote Waves Roll On.
Mhm.
And it is also one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And what was the other one you mentioned?
And then the first one was Alabaster Moon.
Alabaster Moon, yeah, which is a very romantic song. Yeah, I'm very fond of it too. I have a Cuban friend of mine who made a recording of Alabaster Moon in very, very much in kind of a crooner style,
Oh,
you know, like a Cuban crooner. And he sang it in English. He used the backtrack of the song, the same track that you're listening to, but he superimposed his own voice.
okay.
And so it's out there on YouTube if you search Armando Perez Alabaster Moon, and you'll hear him singing his version of the song. And it's a completely different feel.
Hold Up Breakers Cafe and Other Stories.
Yeah. So this is yet another cover by Alex Gerard. And this is a mural that was painted on a wall in the Tenderloin section of San Francisco.
Okay.
And when I saw this photograph, I adored it. And it inspired 80% of the songs on the album. If you notice, it's kind of hard, but do you notice the people who are leaning up against the wall?
Right. You know, I didn't see that at first. I see it now.
So most people don't see that right away. And then when they do, it kind of blows their mind, because what you have there is this contrast between these bums are basically, they're just hanging out there. It's the middle of the day. You can tell that they've had a hell of a time of it. Some of them are drinking. Some of them are sleeping off a bad night. And yet the contrast is that you have this high society 1930s speakeasy environment with the Breakers Cafe and the band that performs at the Breakers Cafe.
Yeah.
And the contradiction between sort of the high and the low, the high end and the low end of in that image was very inspiring to me. So I ended up writing some songs from the point of view of some of the people sitting on the floor, leaning up against the mural. So I chose them. And that's why the album is called Breakers Cafe and Other Stories, because this is an album that literally, song for song, tells a story about something or someone.
Nice concept. I like that. I like that.
And that is truly, that was a concept. That was a deliberate, and a lot of it came from seeing this photograph and realizing that there were some great stories to tell.
Yeah.
Is there anything that stood out for you on this one?
Yes. I want to say thank you for pointing that out. The people leaning up against, I didn't see that. I did not see that. Yes, the ghosting waltz.
Yes.
And then country radio station.
Oh, great.
I like that one. Very country,
That one really is a country song.
Yeah, it is.
I wrote 2 country songs on that album, Country Radio and Pale Mirror.
Yeah, that's another good one. Yep. And then Steady on the Ground is another one.
Steady on the Ground. You like that one?
Yeah, I like that
That's
one.
Great. I'm so glad. Yeah.
Okay. And then one more to go. Here we go.
Now this one I can't hold up.
Oh, that's right. You can't. Okay. All right. Holding Fast.
So
last year.
Holding Fast was something of a miracle of an album, because at one point we were going to make that album with a core group of members of the band out here in California. And then COVID sort of made it impossible for people to travel, to come here. It was just a very difficult time. And we could not manage to get 8 members of the band out here. There's just no way to do it.
Right.
So I thought that we were not going to make the album at all. I was going to have to wait. And then a series of circumstances led me to connecting with Bob Goldstein, who is an extraordinary guitarist and musician, also a friend of the photographer Alexis Girard, who introduced us, and we became very good friends. And Bob joined me. He lives in LA. So all of a sudden, there was this notion that if Bob and I could go to a studio, that we might be able to make a stripped down album of these new songs that I'd written. But then very quickly, the guy who runs Gatos Trail Studio in Joshua Tree, California, where we were making the album, liked the music enough to say, well, Mark, I have a feeling that you're going to want a drummer, and I'm a drummer. Should we work together? And he was just a killer drummer. He's a spectacular drummer. If you listen to the album, the guy's incredible. So all of a sudden I had a principal guitar player, electric guitar player. I played the acoustics, he played the electrics. I had a drummer. And then after the first day of recording, Dan, the drummer and owner of the studio, got in touch with a good friend of his, Jonathan, who is a professional studio bass player, who heard the songs and said, I'm coming right up. I'll be up there. And he came and spent 2 days there. And basically, this album came together as a total miracle. And then the last and most essential ingredient in all this was the piano player, Dave Cohen. And Dave played on Breakers Cafe and contributed incredibly. He's an absolutely brilliant musician. And he came back to California to stay here for a week and lend his incredible gifts to Holding Fast. And so with Dave as sort of at the center of this band, as the perhaps the best musician I've ever played with is probably Dave Cohen. We made a miraculous record. And I say it's miraculous because none of us together had ever played together until we met in the studio.
Really? Wow.
None of us. I had played individually with Dave, individually with Bob. I had never played with Dan, the drummer, and I had never played with Jonathan, the bass player.
Mm-hmm.
And on the first day of making this album, we're all sitting in the same space. None of us have ever played together as a band. And we kicked off, but everyone had listened to the music,
Mm-hmm.
but none of us had played together. And I'll tell you this, there is no song on that album that went farther than 3 takes.
Really? Wow.
In other words, we sounded like a band from the minute we started playing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you listen carefully to that record, there's no way in the world you're going to listen to that and think, oh, these people had never seen or played together.
It doesn't sound like that. No,
Well, no, it sounds like a band that's been playing forever.
Yeah, you're right.
And so I'm extremely happy with Holding Fast. I also think that a couple of those songs are among the best ones that I've written overall. So I'm feeling very good about it.
Good.
And
I'll give you
I've gotten
my
some good feedback.
I'll give you my three favorites.
Please do tell me.
And then I want to hear your talk about the feedback you're getting too. The Bells,
Yes,
the Gamble,
sure.
and then these are all the
Yeah.
and then the Good Train.
The Good Train.
Yeah, I like.
Well,
that's
you've
got
chosen
great lyrics, and in that one too.
Thank you. You've chosen three of my favorites. The Gamble is I loved writing The Gamble because I like waltzes.
Mm-hmm.
And almost, I think every album I've made has at least one waltz.
Yeah.
Including the Ghosting Waltz on
Right.
Baker's Cafe. But The Gamble is a waltz, and the words are all about how to be a card player, but how sometimes you think you're winning, but you're losing.
Yeah.
And so, of course, it serves as a metaphor for
Yeah.
many things in life.
Yeah.
The Good Train
Mhm.
is a country song, really.
Yeah.
And it does harken back to my days in Saratoga Springs, New York, when I got involved with sort of the folk music community in Saratoga around a cafe called Cafe Lena.
Okay.
Which, if you look up Cafe Lena, if you Google Cafe Lena, it is literally a who's who of the greatest musicians of that time. And it's still an active cafe. It's the longest running Greenwich Village cafe, if you like, since the heyday of the Greenwich Village cafes. It relocated in Saratoga Springs, and it's still active today. And I've performed there a number of times. But it's where Don McLean wrote American Pie. It's where Bob Dylan would come up the fire escape and do one set for an audience of 50 people and then go back into the kitchen to chat with Lena. It was really, for me, it was a musical education. Extraordinary place. And so I was thinking of that to a great extent when I wrote The Good Train, because so many of the folk singers who came through Cafe Lena would sing a song about a train. I mean, trains are a real frame of reference in American folk music. And I wanted to write my own. It's just that simple. And I did. So I wrote The Good Train.
Uh-huh.
And it became a showcase for Dave Cohen's unbelievable piano playing.
Right.
I mean, listen to his piano playing, and it's just killer.
I was going to say, and it's got that tempo. It's got, it's the train, I mean.
Very much so. And once you start your foot tapping, you're not going to stop.
Right.
Just like the train.
It does get the foot tapping. I'll ask you one more question. Do you still paint at all?
Well, thank you for asking that question. I stopped painting in a serious way about 2015. In other words, by that time, I had become so involved in my music again.
Mhm.
Frankly, I was just taken aback by how much the music came back into my life. So I put the painting on the back burner and I have not gone back to it. That doesn't mean that I won't, but I'm not painting at the moment.
Okay. Okay.
The last show that I had was in 2014, and for a while I was doing nicely. I had a number of shows and sold some paintings, but it's something that's very significant to me. Painting is a very important part of who I am, but I have not been painting for a number of years. Music is basically front and center in my life right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But thank you
Well,
for asking about that. I appreciate it.
I lied. I've got one more question.
Yeah.
What's coming up on the horizon for you?
Well, at the moment, there is nothing coming up on the horizon for one reason, really. I've had a chronic condition with my hands.
Yeah, you
This
mentioned.
is one of the ironies of the name of the band being Hand, but my left hand right now is suffering from this chronic condition. It's a skin condition, but what it does is the skin gets very thin.
Okay.
And it cracks very easily. And it's my left hand. I can't bar a chord comfortably. I can't run a scale on the guitar. So I've literally not been able to comfortably play my instrument since I made this album.
Okay.
Since I made Holding Fast. So it's been maybe, I'd say for the past 8 months, I have not been able to really pick up the guitar and do anything valuable. It's frustrating because I know that I'm not done writing.
Right.
And I know that I have it in me to write more. So basically what I have to do is allow this chronic condition to run its course. This has happened to me before in my life.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm familiar with the pattern, but this is the longest that I've ever had to deal with it. So we'll see. I'm not, so at the moment, I am not looking at anything new,
Okay.
but I am expecting to get right back into it as soon as this condition improves.
Okay. Have you seen a doctor about that?
I have, but it's time for me to see that doctor again.
Okay.
In other words, that there are ways that I could accelerate the,
Right.
you know, the improving of the condition. And sometimes it's something that takes care of itself, and then it doesn't reemerge for 3 years.
Okay.
And other times it's like this, but it will be tended to at some point.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, best of luck to you.
Greg, thank you. This was so much fun.
Well, yeah, that's what I want it to be. That's what I
Well,
want.
it is. It was truly enjoyable, and fun for me to go back through a lot of these experiences in my life.
Well,
I
sure.
hope there is some interest to a few people out there. Yeah.
I'm sure they will be. I know they will be. So,
Yeah. Well, thanks again.
Everybody's experience is different, so that's what it's about, you know.
It is. Well, you're a very easy person to talk to and to talk with. So
well, thank you. Thank you.
there is something that I really wanted to single out, something that I wanted to mention. When we began to consider the recording of the album Pin It on the Wind, we had lost Marielle as a female vocalist. And I very much needed someone who could pick up the baton and really do a great job on these new songs. And I was introduced to a very young Charlie Tiernan. Charlie is truly one of the most exceptional singers that I've ever heard. And when she was, I think, 14 or 15 years old, she already sounded like an adult and had a remarkably well-formed voice, wonderful instincts for singing. She was very much a young professional. She had already performed quite a few years in her life as a singer and as an actor. And so by the time she auditioned for us, she was simply extraordinary. We listened to her do one of our songs, and we immediately decided happily that she would fit right in. And so she is the vocalist that you will hear throughout the album Pin It on the Wind, and also throughout Breakers Cafe. And she makes an appearance on one track of the newest album, Holding Fast. She's a young woman who is now pursuing a career on her own. She's been performing at various festivals, some of them with some pretty big names. And she's going by the name of Charlie. I mean, it is her name, but she's just using it as a stage name, and doing her own music, and basically starting what could be a very promising career. So I just wanted to make sure to give her proper due. She's really quite extraordinary. When she was very young, she showed incredible maturity, and I think that she's going to have an extraordinary future before her.
I bet she will. Sounds like it. Thank you, Mark. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Greg.
And I appreciate your time and talking with me and the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Well, it was the same for me. I enjoyed every moment of it. And I think you really have a wonderful way of interviewing and asking questions. It ends up feeling like a good exchange. And I think you're a very good podcaster.
Well, I appreciate that. Okay.
Thanks
And
again, Greg.
sure, and we'll be in touch. Okay, Mark.
Okay, sounds perfect. Thank you.
All the best.
Bye.